Arks of Omen. Vashtorr. Where mesh the cogs of industry, to grind between their ever-turning teeth the flesh and blood and soul stuff of the mortal and the infernal both. Where roars the hungry furnace, its flames hope to devour, its heat to give life from searing crucible into molten ore and blood and bile a bubble. Where scratches the quill and clatter the keys, by candle flame and cold buzzing lumen lit, by desperate hand and mind obsessed, driven, set free by mortality discarded. Where sparks the wire, where writhes the cable, where blends the flesh in the adamant, where makes the engine infernal, and where laments the bound and bargained soul. There do you find him, there do you see him, and in the seeing does he know your heart, your mind, your price. There waits Vashtorr the Arkifane, and damnation is his gift. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and events of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. If you enjoy my little tap dance, do hit us with a like and comment, or a coin via Super Thanks, and know that we do mythology and dinosaurs too. Links in the description. Now on to the topic. On, I say. For today, we will be continuing the ongoing narrative campaign, which has promised to alter the entire setting, the Arks of Omen. And this is the entry for the newest warp entity, the being that would dream of being a god, the Arkifane. The would-be god of cogs and smithies and hell forges all, Vashtorr. Thus far in the narrative, Vashtorr has formed a tenuous alliance with the War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler. Vashtorr has promised to help Abaddon to capture the keys to a mighty weapon, so powerful that it will hand him the victory in the material realm, while Vashtorr will be able to then ascend to true godhood. All they need do is capture many artifacts spread across the galaxy, but if combined, they will form a key, and whatever is locked away will provide the two the means to fulfill their greatest desires. For Abaddon will not rest until he has not just slain the Emperor, not just taken the head of Rabuti Guilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Primarch of the 13th, the Ultramarines. Abaddon wants it all. He will not just smash and slaughter, as most believe. He wishes to replace the Imperium, to reforge it in his own image. And to do all of this, Vashtorr has created huge ships made from space hulks, vast vessels that are now armed to the teeth. With them at the core of Chaos fleets, all of the Imperium has known unpredictable and near impossible threat levels to contend with. The Navy does what it can, but even Indomitus Crusade fleets have met their end under the assault of the forces of darkness. The actions of Angron being the proof of the matter, as his murder curse spread across the entire fleet, destroying it utterly. But Vashtorr has one important item to collect if he is ever to realize this prophecy of Abaddon's. He must take an item from one of the most heavily defended stations in the entire Imperium. Not necessarily due to the shields, ships, or firepower it can field, but because of who it harbors. Vashtorr cannot ignore this one item, this one part of the central key, but it is on the home of the most feared and famed of all the Emperor's very angels of death. for they were the first to fight at his side. Even during the unification wars they were with him, and this is the center of their power. It is called the Rock, and they who call it home, they are the Emperor's own First Legion, the sons of Lionel Johnson. They are his Dark Angels. Before we get to the meat of the day, the events that mark its passing, I think it is important to remember that this channel is for new players and avid consumers of the universe. Hence, I shall briefly explain why this one citadel is so important. What it was, what it is, and why. The Rock. The Rock is a vast facility, a bastille once called the Alduruk, the Rock of Eternity. And it was old when the Primarch, Lionel Johnson, landed on the world of Caliban, although this was also the name of the mountain on which it stood, Alduruk. And that is now all that is left of the world of Caliban, but I leap ahead. The Primarchs were dispersed across the galaxy as we know, and one landed on the world of Caliban. I will not dwell too much on the history and minutiae, as that we shall save for an entry on the Lion himself, but it is best to know that they were civilization in the more feudal era. The monastery was the center of a group of knights called the Order, and it was one of many on the planet. For there were great beasts that roamed the forests of Caliban, horrors touched by the warp. And many knighthoods existed to defend humanity from their predations. Thus, Lionel Johnson was raised on Caliban, and in the number of the Order. It is where he learned much of battle and honor, for it runs through his veins now, both battle and honor. He was found by the Emperor and given command of the Fighting First, and he renamed that legion the Dark Angels. They excelled and recruited from Caliban, filling out their ranks of Astartes Space Marines, with honor-bound knights and their kin from the population. Alas, for a myriad of reasons, the lord who was above Lionel Johnson in the Order, Luther, he came out into the stars with the Primarch, but was sent back to Caliban to train men, not to lead them. He turned from his friend, his lord, the Lion. He turned traitor. And when the Lion returned to his home, to restock, to replenish, and plump out his numbers again, he was attacked by the traitors under Luther, the knight he had once so trusted. And in the battle that erupted from this act of betrayal, the planet was destroyed. Only one segment of the world survived its destruction, the home of the Order, the monastery fortification. For beneath its surface, in catacombs running deep into the earth, there were ancient devices from the dark age of technology, and they protected the chunk and much of the fortress. Oh, much was destroyed. Yet those tunnels and places beneath the ground were protected, and they were the heart of the fortress. Artifacts of ancient power, both mystical and technological. The planet was gone, their home destroyed, their people wiped out. But still, there was the rock. It had no atmosphere. Nothing would ever grow on it again. Yet the heart of the fortress remained, and on it, the new was built to defend the old. When the legions were broken down into chapters of Space Marines of only 1,000 each, the Dark Angels kept ties with all of their successors, and they kept the Rock as their center of operations, their Bastille, their spiritual home. So the Dark Angels have, since that point over 10,000 years ago, been what is called a fleet chapter. They do not stick to a fixed position. None know where the Rock will appear, as it has engines and the ability to move through the warp like any other ship. Just on a different scale entirely. Even Space Hulks can be dwarfed by its bulk, enemy fleets torn asunder by its gun emplacements, all while it is practically immune to harm behind the Gorgon's aegis. A void shield of such power that none have taken it down with firepower alone. And the only beings to ever walk its halls were the Dark Angels. or the one set of interlopers who came through warp trickery and sorcery. The Rock is a place that has never been a hub of joint activity or diplomatic embassies being toasted. It is the secret home of the Dark Angels, and its whereabouts is a secret they would sacrifice the lives of entire planets to protect. Yet, in rare events, it will be sent to the front by its master, the Lords of the Inner Circle, the Grand Master of the Order, the Chapter, who is presently Lord Azrael. The Rock is a focal point of power, aye, but also of hope. Much as people despise to admit it, much as they might attempt to deny it, there is no avoiding the simple truth. The Dark Angels are both respected by their allies and feared by their enemies. They are the sons of the Lion, and he was ever one of the greatest Primarchs. They, the best of its legions. For the Rock to fall, it would not only be a horrific blow to the image and morale of the populace, the nobility, guard, and the navy. It would shake the Adeptus Astartes to the very core. Perhaps even more than the loss of Macragge. Perhaps. For the Dark Angels can have a very jaded reputation amongst their brethren, but in truth, others may never want to be Dark Angels, would not mimic them, do not consider them their spiritual liege. But there is not an Astartes, a space marine in the entire galaxy, that does not respect them, does not have a healthy dollop of concern when dealing with them. Like an intimidating older brother who may not get invited to all of the family gatherings, he is never taken lightly, never ignored, and never threatened. He lurks there when all else fails and the chips are down, ready to do what must be done. For the Dark Angels to be defeated is an intimate loss for all Astartes. For the Rock to be taken by unclean forces, it would wound every Marine alive. So, now you know. And let us proceed to this, the Arks of Omen. Vashtorr. On those occasions when Vashtorr the Arkifane manifested in real space, he was forced, as are all demons, to confine his essence within a corporeal shell. Though a demigod of his kind, and possessed of the ability to reshape reality through cunning and force, still, he felt as constrained at such times as would be a mortal daring the void in a pressure suit. All was different within the warp, in the metaphysical realm of infernal industry known as the Soul Forges. Vashtorr was free to exist as his true self. He was a gestalt realization of innovation without conscience, a churning mass of invention and obsessive artifice. Here he was a timeless thing, an ever-revising quantum schematic of unfettered leaps of logic. The merest glimpse of his true aspect would have driven all but the most supremely intelligent mortals instantly mad. Vashtorr's sanctum lay at the conceptual heart of the Soul Forges. It was a place of endless spiraling pipes and cables, hungry churning gears and gales of sulphurous steam. The entire impossible edifice twisted and realigned constantly under the influence of a galaxy's worth of conceptual mortal imaginings. It was guarded by entities embodying the boundless malice of the cruelest mortal intellects, and the raw power for annihilation, those minds imbued into their most diabolic technologies. Deep within the ghastly machine, Vashtorr brooded in a place of drifting smog and flickering neurological lightning. Each theory and concept that crackled through his consciousness struck like hammer to anvil to send immaterial sparks dancing. Amidst the motes, Vashtorr discerned visions of events transpiring across the span of real space. The Arkifane had embedded his imps through the societal fabric of countless galactic civilizations. Wherever sentient minds employed imagination, the imps found purchase in superstition, becoming gremlins, ill-wills, weird jinn, cacosparks, and innumerable other spirits of sabotage and mechanical malice. Anchored thus in the fabric of reality, Vashtorr's imps showed him much. He sought for Arks of Omen and their bale fleets. He watched the netherworld blade cut through the gloom of the Kalnath expanse. Demonic techno-possessors had been joined by warpsmiths, masters of possession, demon engines, obliterated cults, and countless other technologically corrupted renegade factions. Their bale fleet grew and spread. He saw the Chaoticus and the Hound of the Void and the Seed of Doubt assailing forge worlds and holdings of their knightly allies. They struck here and there across the Imperium Nihilus. Vashtorr was unsurprised to see that, of the 3 Arks, only the Hound of the Void had held to its mission and recovered its key fragment. The infernal threnody flitted through the empiric sparks before him, and Vashtorr saw it deep within the galactic core, being ruthlessly picked apart by the kin of the Kronos hegemony for trespassing in their territories. The sobbing god, by comparison, had somehow escaped the peril that had almost engulfed it. Scourgemaster Ugata had prized his renegades and sorely damaged Ark from the hungry jaws of High Fleet Kraken. Despite still being heavily infested with warrior bioforms, the sobbing god was now engaged in raids upon the worlds of the Felgoth Nebula, and spreading both chaos, corruption, and tyrannid invasion wherever it went. Vashtorr was intrigued as to what cunning innovations had allowed Ugata to effect his escape. He tore his regard away, regretfully reminding himself to focus on greater matters. Here the Perfidium and its Emperor's children masters, gripped by their obsession to claim not only their own key fragment, but as many more as they could recover. There the Sacrogeist, dark, drifting lifeless. Traces of withered plant life were dotted here and there about its corridors amidst the human and blasted dead. Vashtorr reflected that the longer such a huge, complex galactic mechanism ran, the greater were the chances of unexpected complications arising and other parties intruding upon its operation. Had the Blood God planned the interruption of the Battle of Malak, or merely seized upon it in wrath? Vashtorr suspected rather the Changer of the Ways' hand in that cataclysm. His pawns sacrificed upon the altar of expediency. Neither possibility surprised Vashtorr, but both concerned him. He did not doubt that the servants of the Dark Gods would be compelled to acts of sabotage in the name of the Great Game. And then, of course, there was the Dreamer, the Exile King. He, of any, would have cause to despise Vashtorr's artifice if he learned the truth. He roamed further afield by the day, and no longer fought alone. He left broken cogs in his wake, the Sacrogeist only the most recent amongst them. The Arkifane concluded that matters required acceleration. It irked him to rush, and to simplify the elegant workings of grand mechanisms, particularly those most central to his grandest inventions. Yet it was better, he pragmatically reflected, to drive a device to breaking point, and thus have it achieve its purpose, than to allow it to stagnate and falter for the sake of caution or ego. As the demigod of every scientist who injected an agent or practiced a theorem before it was ethically safe, every engineer who ever cast aside regulations in the name of liberated intellect. It was well within Vashtorr's nature to improvise thus. A span of time had passed since the events of Malak Baal, at least as mortals perceived it with their limited senses. Now it was time for Vashtorr to dirty himself with the confining touch of real space again. He knew which matter most demanded his attention. Already he had consulted with the War Master, for appearance's sake, if nothing more. What Vashtorr did not know, yet, was the location of his target. There was a reason the Arkifane tinkered always with so many mortal devotees and devices. One amongst his countless cogs in real space had clicked perfectly into alignment and generated the solution to his quandary. Vashtorr had only to step forth and claim the offered output. A brief moment's contemplation showed him which of his parallel schemes could be enhanced by forging connections with this one. Focusing on individual dancing sparks, the Arkifane triggered walking dreams and manifested data omens to activate mortal servants and allies. He was soon satisfied that all would fulfill their designated functions. One by one, the metaphysical cogs turned at Vashtorr's bidding. Within the limited temporal flow of real space, events occurred in linear fashion over centuries, cause and effect manifesting with each mortal decision, action, and choice. Beings discovered his worship by accident or design, dedicating entire lifespans and all their imagination and artifice to his plans. Technologies were created, underwent catastrophic failures, or mutated in line with Vashtorr's whims, each time advancing his designs with clockwork precision. Renegade warlords offered him their devotion or struck bargains with his proxies. They undertook star-spanning quests without ever knowing that they were but cogs in one of the Arkifane's innumerable devices. In Vashtorr's perception, all this transpired with instant synchronicity. The clockwork of carefully aligned realities meshed and churned, growing in complexity until it filled his shadowy sanctum and fused in turn with the cogs of his own warp staff. The essence of Vashtorr crafted itself into the fractal complexities of his latest real space engine, aligning corporeal frequencies until it achieved a singularity of warp translation. The veil of reality shredded before him, and Vashtorr the Arkifane stepped into a dancing storm of lightning. Corporeally manifest, Vashtorr stood with hammer in hand upon a glowing dais at the heart of a teleportarum shrine. He permitted himself a moment to align his senses and absorb the scene around him. A robed figure lay prostrate before the dais, augmetic arms and tendrils spread wide. Several other, less heavily augmented figures knelt beside what Vashtorr assessed as warding shrines. Each device bore signs of fresh sabotage to break their supernatural power. Vashtorr sensed the layout of the facility sprawling out around him, its pressure vessel nature and the hard cold of the void beyond its fragile metal skin, just as intended. He knew that he now stood within the heart of a highly classified, deep void research and monitoring station, shared by a coven of the superstitious Martian tech shamans and the entitled meddlers humanity called Inquisitors. The acolytes blared vox-amplified binaric prayers. They competed with the howl of warning klaxons. Vashtorr understood every machine language in the history of the galaxy. The crude cyber patois of the Adeptus Mechanicus was no mystery to him. The Arkifane could not resist a chuckle as the acolytes heaped praise upon him as an avatar of the Omnissiah. He slammed his hammer against the dais, and infernal energies coursed through the chamber. The luckless adepts' prayers turned to screams as mutant circuitry erupted from their augmetics and burrowed through their bodies, melding, twisting, and tearing them into flesh-metal spawn. Another strike of Vashtorr's hammer upon the dais, and the arcing energies changed hue. He sensed a distant energy signature align, questing tendrils of empiric power, interlocking to form a temporary corridor through which a fearless band of post-human mortals stepped. Vashtorr stood aside as a squad of space marines clad in the black and silver of the Death Watch materialized on the dais. The shoulder guards bore an array of proud loyalist heraldry. They wielded the potent weapons of veteran xeno-hunters. Their leader carried a heavily modified bolter, a sheathed power sword, and wore the icon of the Imperial Fist on his shoulder guard, turned to Vashtorr and slammed one fist against his chestplate. "Hydra Dominatus!" he barked. "Verily," replied Vashtorr. Know you your role at this juncture, Watch Sergeant Lyora? He loaded the title with dry amusement. For his part, the Alpha Legionary chuckled, then thumped the shot selector of his weapon. I do, Dark Artificer. We shall serve. Go forth, then, and fulfill your role, said Vashtorr. I will see to it that an escape craft awaits you and your brethren when the deed is done. Follow you the code beacon that bears my code signature, and you shall find it. My thanks, Dark Artificer, said the Alpha Legionary. He flashed a string of hand signals to his waiting brothers, and the foe kill team hastened from the dais. Vashtorr watched them leave through the shrine's blast doors, turning left and jogging off down the corridor. The Arkifane marveled to himself how strange it was to experience only a single event or moment in time, each after another, rather than watching it all play out at once. Not for the first time, the Arkifane found himself grudgingly impressed that mortals achieved anything at all with such a limited view of reality. The clatter of approaching soldiers broke Vashtorr's reverie. He expelled a furnace rumble of annoyance. Lyora's cog have their task in this moment, and I my own, he muttered, striking the dais a third and final time. The machinery within the chamber writhed and warped in response. Copper and silver nematodes flowed from the point where Vashtorr's hammer strike had struck the dais. Squirming over and through the stylized letter I, wrought 30 feet tall across on the deck of the chamber. The energies arcing over the teleportarum dais turned to blood red and void black as Vashtorr stepped down and hefted his hammer. At his binaric bidding, the grossly deformed tech spawn heaved themselves towards the blast doors to meet the first soldiers coming the other way. Vashtorr saw the mortals briefly. Some wore what they no doubt considered advanced body armor and clutched laser rifles linked to bulky backpacks by wire trunking. The insignia on the floor was echoed on their shoulder guards and helms. Others were cyborgs. These wore rubberized crimson flak robes. They carried weapons that melded powerful technologies with primitive artifice. Then the tech spawn slammed into the newly arriving defenders in a whirl of deformed limbs and whirling blades. Moors of wet flesh and straining wire snapped closed over limbs and heads. Nests of writhing mechadendrils erupted from puckered orifices to ensnare victims or punch into their bodies and spew demonic corruption into fresh hosts. Sparkling masses of bone and ragged wiring swung like clubs into the helms of luckless mortal soldiers. Officers bawled orders from out in the corridor, and a concentrated hail of gunfire tore through mortals and spawn alike. Vashtorr watched with interest. Behind him, the writhing mass of technological and infernal flesh heaved and settled into a new configuration, somewhere between a cavernous maw and a wall of the infernal glowing cogitator banks. Dark energies welled in the depths of the hideous edifice. Another wave of cyborg soldiers trampled the dead and dying in the doorway and trained their weapons on Vashtorr. He turned his powers upon them and unmade them from within. Artificial organs sputtered and died. Augmetics sprouted whirling filaments and tore loose from the bodies they were part of, ripping bloody trails through flesh and muscle as they went. Some of the cyborgs uttered blurts of alarm as they helplessly turned their weapons upon one another, marionettes moved by Vashtorr's will. Like clockwork, a third wave of soldiers poured through the door of the shrine, precisely as Vashtorr expected. The discolored lightnings of the corrupted teleportarum burst outward, and the newly fashioned warp portal blazed to life. The Arkifane casually hefted his hammer as a howling tide of indentured demons erupted through the portal and surged around him. They fell like an avalanche upon the defenders, soaking up their furious volley fire and tearing into their prey with shrieks of glee. And the screaming began. Before leaving the chamber, Vashtorr turned to attend to one last task. In his warp sight, the inner workings of every machine and device were laid bare, overlaying reality like glowing schemata. He traced pulsing power cables and emergency reroute circuitry beneath the floor of the shrine to a central point, pulsing right where he expected it to be. He had, after all, subtly influenced its placement some 300 linear years before this day. "Automata linkery," he muttered. "Nasty." If left undisturbed, this fail-safe device would reach critical charge and trigger a vortex bomb. The resultant empiric detonation would first annihilate everything within 100 miles and then plunge the installation, its contents, attackers and invaders into a howling warp rift. Vashtorr had no time for such inconveniences, but he did have another design in another place that required such a weapon. A wave of Vashtorr's talent hand, and the intricate mass of wires and circuits cradling the bomb mutated. Silver worms writhed through the underdeck spaces, weaving themselves into the newly meshing temporal stasis generator Vashtorr had improvised. It was a crude thing by his standards, but the Arkifane knew it would prevent the bomb from detonating for precisely 55 minutes and 55 seconds, just long enough for his purposes. The deck plates above the device melted away like quicksilver at Vashtorr's bidding. The device hovered free amidst a crackling cradle of dark lightning. "It will be a pleasure to see the device fulfill its purpose, and the Farseer's last moment of realization," sighed Vashtorr wistfully. Then he brightened. How easy it was, he reflected, to start thinking in stilted causal lines when bound by the limits of real space. He would simply observe the moment once back within his sanctum. With a chuckle like grinding gears, Vashtorr sent the bomb skimming away through the warp portal and turned to his immediate task. His demonic host had torn a bloody path through the secret station. It was a cramped structure, its octagonal corridors ribbed with pipes and cabling, and so low a ceiling that Vashtorr had to stoop to traverse them. Corridors radiated out from chambers packed with cogitator banks, life support shrines, scientific equipment, and the sort of mag-bolted furniture typical of installations often subject to low or zero gravity. Many of these spaces were now lit dark crimson, thanks to the quantities of human blood spattered across this strip lumen. Bodies, or bits of bodies, lay everywhere amidst the wreckage of improvised barricades and the fire started by wild weapons discharge. Steam streaked from ruptured pipes, half-seen and monstrous beings crooning and keening as they stalked through the clouds of vapor. Here and there, mortal soldiers still fought back amidst the strobe light of emergency lumen and weapons. Vashtorr emerged into a chamber where armored mortals poured shots into plague bearers, from whose bodies jutted smog-belching boils and glowing pipes. Impatient at such delays, Vashtorr waded into the soldiers with his hammer swinging. He swatted one warrior into a wall. He closed the talon of his free hand above the helm of another, grimacing as the mortal's panicked fire rebounded from his corporeal shell. Vashtorr dragged the motive force from the mortal's weapons and war gear with a thought, then channeled it back into his victim in a single killing jolt. Tossing aside the smouldering corpse, Vashtorr turned to face the last mortal who blocked his path. She stood tall, clad in finely crafted power armor, and wielding a blade that pulsated venomously in Vashtorr's warp sight. "Inquisitor Hallex shall hear of this abomination," she shouted. "Think you that I care, little fleshling?" asked Vashtorr, projecting his voice in a static lace snarl from every vox emitter in the room. "You will, when his vengeance descends upon you," the mortal snarled, hurling herself at Vashtorr. Impatient and unwilling to feel the bite of that blessed blade, he parried her strike with his hammer, then shoved her backward into the embrace of the plague bearers. Many there are who wish vengeance upon me, but they all have their price and their uses," he said, before stalking from the chamber. The mortal's war cries turned to wails of pain and horror at his back. The Arkifane passed through a few more corridors and chambers that he knew as well as if he had designed and built them himself. A last, heavily warded blast doors blocked his path. Its defenders he crushed with swift hammer blows. Its wards he burned away with rerouted motive force ripped from nearby machinery. Beyond the ruptured doors, Vashtorr found another chamber, in appearance little different to the dozens he had already passed. A hunched adept of the machine god was wired into banks of ornate cogitators. Stacks of parchment printouts and iron-bound tomes surrounded her like a rampart. She glared myopically up at Vashtorr through ocular lenses. The taut skin of her face was parchment-hued, twisted in disgust at the sight of him. If she felt any fear, the mortal did not show it. "You will tell me what I wish to know," Vashtorr snarled as he loomed through the doorway. "Abomination," she hissed. "I am blessed in the sight of the Omnissiah, and I will never." Impatient, Vashtorr drove a talon through the adept's throat. She gagged, blood welling from the awful wound. "Not you, fleshling," sneered Vashtorr, redirecting his gaze to the mass of ancient cogitators that packed out the room. "Tell me what I wish to know. The mortal would fear and loathe you if they knew your truth. I can give you freedom, a body, a purpose." Lumen flickered and readouts sputtered as the abominable intelligence that had hidden for so long within the inquisitorial station replied. "What is it that you wish to know?" Vashtorr emitted a furnace rumble. His eyes flared bright. "Tell me where I can find the battle station that the mortals call the Rock." The Arkifane's fleet and intentions. Vashtorr went on to interrogate the artificial intelligence, and it gave up the location of the rock itself. It could track it through endless computations and information it gleaned from the Imperium in general. Vashtorr was to lead this force and, as we have heard, gain support from many quarters, along with a host of demons under his direct thrall. But he also made compact with two he had already worked with. The Arkifane had a working relationship with none other than Perturabo, the demon primarch of the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors. Thus Vashtorr requested forces from him, and also from Abaddon. Thus, Vashtorr the Arkifane gained a huge fleet made up of ships from both parties, as well as his own, of course. For he captured a massive space hog and installed the artificial intelligence within it. The intellect known as the Aurak Myriad was then gifted the huge composite vessel, and thus was the Aurak Unleashed created. The AI being able to use many of the subsystems of the ships that made up the Twisted Hulk. It had a vast array of defenses and weapons at its disposal, yet even its huge size was no match for its monstrous target, the rock itself. Hence, the Arkifane also developed augmented weapons that attached to the foul hulk. Strong enough and specifically designed for one task and one task alone, the countering of the Gorgon's Aegis, the shield that protected the rock. A plan centuries in the making, about to be realized in the most horrific way possible, for the Arkifane would ambush and invade the rock itself. With the location known, the perfect moment was chosen, for the Dark Angels had been watching a world where Chaos Space Marines had been gathering, and they suspected that the Fallen may have been there. Hence, they mustered to strike in force, They brought the Rock with them. The Rock came out of the warp with a fleet of escorting Dark Angel ships. Yet before they were truly translated, fully operational, their sensors were blinded by a wave front from the warp. It was a perfectly planned and executed trap. The ships of the Iron Warriors and Black Legion fell on their opposite numbers in a welter of rage. Fire blasted the Loyalist ships and gutted some. The panic was short, and the Dark Angels reacted with amazing efficiency. They drew back and seemed to run for their lives, but in truth, they were dragging the enemy fleet after them in hopes of protecting the Rock. The sight of Loyalist corpse worshippers' ships in retreat was too much for most of their enemies, and the Chaos Fleet rampaged after them in hot pursuit. But this, of course, left the Rock on its own. Now there were forces in the system, quite impressive ones. For Task Force 12 of Battlefleet Hephaestus was above the primary world, Marwell's reach. It had none other than Ultramarines led by Tigurius, their chief librarian, and they had been called there due to a lack of Imperial tithes. Distress calls could go ignored or go unnoticed, but an act of rebellion or lack of payment would always elicit a response from the Imperium of Mankind. Hence the Dark Angels had agreed to assist and brought their largest asset to the fray. But they were far from the Rock, and the Hulk, the Aurak Unleashed, was bearing down on that facility. The Hulk was being pounded by the Loyalist fortress as it came on, but the Goliath then retorted. The Gorgon's Aegis, the void shield that covered the entire meteor, flared as it was struck, but there was something wrong, deeply wrong. For the 5 weapons attached to the Aurak Unleashed did not stop unloading their powerful beam at it, and then the energies oscillated at exactly the same resonance as the shield itself. A design beyond the comprehension of the Mechanicum, a weapon the Tech Marines of the Dark Angels could not even understand. By matching frequencies, the shield then became a conduit of the blast. Huge lightning strikes of power came from the shield, burning and exploding entire segments of the Rock. Its defenses had been turned on its defenders. And when the confusion was at its height, when the Hulk had gotten as close as it dared, Vashtorr took to the void of space and flew down to the Rock. His is the power motive, the ability to see all mechanisms and cogs whirling. Hence he could detect every defensive hardpoint, every secret entry to this fortress. And he took control of the attacking force, directing them to these Achilles' heels. And within moments, the Arkifane and elements of the Iron Warriors and Black Legion were aboard. Pinpoint perfection teleport arm strikes, bringing Terminators exactly where they needed to be. Assault ships dropping squads of ancient terrors Marines of the Long War directly into the very heart of the fortress. And it was instant slaughter on all sides. Both defenders who had been successfully bushwhacked, but also the attackers. For the Rock, even without its main shields, was a bastion that even Rogel Dawn would have been proud. And the defenders were the Dark Angels, those terrible warriors who would simply not die, never yield and never break. The stoic defenders made the attackers pay for every inch of ground they took, every hall, every corridor, every intersection. But this was a piece, a plan, orchestrated by an immortal, a symphony writ over centuries of murky planning and prophetic foresight. And Vashtorr would play at being a god. He was so well prepared, so precise in his machinations, that the defenders were swiftly losing. And even the heroes of the chapter now fought at the very front of the battle. Vashtorr stood atop an outthrust spar of Gothic architecture, high above the Aurak Unleashed mountainous prow. Hundreds of data tethers speared from the hull plating of the Ark and into Vashtorr's corporeal hide, binding him to the craft in a mass of mechanical nerves. Through these connections flowed the voice of the Aurak Myriad, in the form of data inroads and nuanced vid feeds. The abominable intelligence warned Vashtorr that firing the Unmaker had burned out 3 of the weapon's 5 projectors. It advised that the weapon would be no further use without extensive repairs. "Fortunate then that we need not rely overmuch upon the durability of mortal manufacture," grumbled Vashtorr. "The weapon has served its purpose." Ahead, the rock swelled to fill the void. Vashtorr saw the distant flares of real space engines and knew these marked where escort vessels were settling into their precisely managed pattern. His warp sight revealed shimmering energy spectra where battery and lance fire whipped back and forth between renegade warships and the Dark Angel's battle fortress. Further away still, Vashtorr perceived the spectral flickers of distant battles as his hunting packs fought against the scattered Dark Angel's fleet. The world of Marwent's Reach was eclipsed by the looming rock, but Vashtorr had seen enough of the planet from afar to recognize the energy signatures of unexpected Loyalist warships orbiting it. Those vessels would have detected all that was happening in the interplanetary void. That, in turn, meant that haste was required. Yet Vashtorr was not overly troubled. Like any talented engineer, the Arkifane had worked redundancies into his plans to account for any unexpected issues. This was all the focus he could give to his wider plan for the moment, however, for the beguiling song of his prize welled from deep within the rock to capture his attention. Vashtorr knew the mortals locked many secrets away within the vast stone fortress, but only one interested him. The last of the 3 pivotal mechanisms that would form the heart of the key. The Arkifane stretched out his warpcraft and seized control of heretic vox frequencies throughout the system. He spoke, knowing that his static-laden voice boomed from countless vox grills, vox ponders, geist waves, and supernatural communications relays. "Release all attack craft. Unleash all munitions. Play your part in my grand mechanism of havoc. Your Arkifane commands you." Vashtorr felt the Aurak Unleashed shudder beneath him as the immense craft fired extra thrusters and closed with the unshielded rock. The colossal vessel approached from a high angle to avoid the miles-long plasma trails of the battle station's drive cones. As it did, a wave of Dark Angel's interceptor craft spilled from launch bays in the rock's flanks and rose to meet it. Flocks of Heldrake's, Heretic Astartes gunships, and void-soaring demons erupted from the launch bays of the Aurak Unleashed in response. Vashtorr found himself in a roiling storm of dogfights and strafing runs. Tzeentchian demons riding fleshy discs surfed trails of fire through the Loyalist midst. They hurled fistfuls of mutagenic flame as they went. A wing of Heldrakes shot low over Vashtorr's head, their flaring jets silent in the void. They were caught amongst a barrage of rift cannon fire, twisting into freakish stained-glass effigies of themselves before being swallowed in a collapsing warp rift. A formation of Dark Angel's gunships arrowed towards Aurak Unleashed, a swarm of fighter craft flanking them. Vashtorr noted the expertise with which the Loyalist pilots flew, how they cut apart heretic interceptors that tried to break their formation. The Arkifane watched the interplay of mechanical systems and strategic attack formations for a moment, then raised his hammer. He channeled a blast of arcane power through the weapon and into the centermost Loyalist gunship. The attack craft disassembled instantly, bursting apart in a nebula of component parts. The other Loyalist craft threw themselves into frantic evasive maneuvers as they were engulfed by the expanding cloud of mechanical debris. Vashtorr couldn't resist a chuckle as he watched armored figures, formerly passengers of the disassembled gunship, now struggle in hard vacuum or bouncing violently from armor-glass canopies as their escort craft collided with them. Vashtorr returned his attention to the rock, drawn inexorably by the song of his prize. The Dark Angel's battle system loomed larger even than the gargantuan Arks of Omen now descending upon it. Yet it was virtually unshielded, many of its weapon systems temporarily crippled by the onslaught of the Unmaker, while the Aurak Unleashed was fresh to the fight. Gun batteries and esoteric alien weapons studded the Ark of Omen's hull like boils on a plague victim. They opened fire as they hove into range, and raised billowing clouds of flames across the flanks and upper plane of the rock. Impacts slammed into the void shields that had been raised to protect the Tower of Angels and caused them to blaze blue. In return, and despite its wounds, the rock hurled an intense firestorm at the Aurak Unleashed. Missiles and laser blasts splashed across the Ark's layers of void shields, power fields, thaumatrotic arrays, temporal shunt guards, and other weird and exotic defense systems. In Vashtorr's warp site, the complex energy schemata of the rock's internal systems overlaid its corporeal reality. He saw clearly the damage wrought by the collapse of the Gorgon's Aegis, yet he could see as well where repairs were already being effected, maimed systems awakening back to wrath. He knew that, should this point-blank shooting war last too long, the rock would overwhelm even the Aurak Unleashed. Yet Vashtorr's plan would not allow this. His infernal senses felt dozens of countdown crons all reach zero simultaneously throughout the heretic fleet. As they did, he tore free from the mesh of data tethers and, suspended amidst a flickering corona of energy, swept toward the rock. Like clockwork, a wave of boarding torpedoes and troop landers thundered from the launch tubes, hangars and embarkation decks of the Aurak Unleashed. At precisely the same moment, a secondary wave of boarding craft fired their thrusters and dived toward the rock. Launched from the picket ships when Vashtorr had first given the order to attack, these assault formations had drifted unpowered among the sensory cacophony of void war, along precise approach vectors until the moment came to wake their engines. Now they converged upon the rock from multiple angles, and for all the skill and firepower of the defenders, dozens of them exploited the element of surprise to reach their drop points unscathed. Vashtorr swooped down through the mayhem, flanked by soaring Tzeentchian demons. At his back came 9 blazing chariots, towing on silvered chains a huge crystal prism set in a mass of flesh-metal mechanisms. Following the Arkifane's meticulous orders, warbands of black legionaries, iron warriors, and word-bearers put down on the airless plain atop the rock. Though they did not know it, their attack pattern echoed closely that employed by Typhus, the herald of the walking plague, when he had launched his own assault against the Dark Angels not so long before. Like the Death Guard before them, Vashtorr's heretic Astartes converged upon the Tower of Angels in full force. Even as Dark Angels' ground forces gathered to meet the assault against Old Aldoruk, so the traitor forces struck against the rock's towering flanks. Informed by Vashtorr's nigh omnipotent knowledge of technology, traitor teleport assaults materialized dead on target, while boarding torpedoes punched through the stony skin of the rock straight into near-surface corridors and galleries. Attack waves struck at hangar bays, cleverly concealed by stone overhangings and Gothic extrusions, but laid bare to the Arkifane's warp site. As the onslaught intensified, Vashtorr allowed part of his consciousness to dive between vid feeds, autosenses, and tactical inroads, witnessing his forces piercing the hide of the rock at multiple sites. He saw Dark Angels rushing to meet each fresh boarding assault. He noted the ferocious firefights that raged along claustrophobic corridors and through statue-lined chambers. Simultaneously, Vashtorr focused also on creating his own breach. With a contemptuous gesture, he rerouted the motive force flowing through 5 energy conduits. The backlash detonated the power cells of a servitor-manned gun deck and blew it outward into the void in a spectacular fireball. Swatting aside tumbling debris with a wave of infernal energies, Vashtorr alighted amidst the cavernous ruin of the battery. Indentured demons capered and tumbled around him, dragging the prism engine into position amidst wreckage that even now was twitching and writhing in the Arkifane's presence. The moment the device was ready, Vashtorr struck it a blow with his hammer, and it blazed to life. Faster and faster the prism span, blazing with unholy hues fit to drive mortals to madness. At the precise correct moment, Vashtorr struck it again, and the prism shattered, collapsing into a howling warp rift contained within the flesh-metal cage. The Arkifane nodded to himself in satisfaction as fresh waves of demons spilled out of the rent to swell his ranks. So reinforced, Vashtorr prowled through the deck's inner bulkhead door and into the rock itself. With every strike of his cloven hooves against the ancient deck plates, the Arkifane felt his anticipation grow. The mechanism sang to him. It crooned its promises. He could see its power shimmering within the deepest depths of the rock, now tantalizingly near. As the roar of bolters and the crackle of unleashed warp flame drew him back to the moment, Vashtorr knew he would not be permitted to claim his prize without a ferocious fight. Ahead, the corridors opened into a chamber of huge size, its echoing vastness painted in vibrant hues by huge stained glass lumen that hung from its vaulted ceilings. Emerging onto a carved balcony, Vashtorr saw his demonic vanguard locked in battle, with hulking loyalist warriors clad in bone-white Terminator plate. "Let us unmake you, then," snarled the Arkifane, as he strode into the fight. The Nemesis Gate. The Arkifane was now blatantly leading his forces to the lowest depths of the rock, where their deepest secrets were kept, their prisoners, their artifacts of ancient providence, their weapons of ultimate sanction. And they had to stop him. But Vashtorr was mighty, and more than able to concentrate his forces now. He kept abreast of the entire combat through his powers, and he forced his way forward at the head of Terminators and Legionaries of the Black Legion and Iron Warriors. Two legions one does not ever wish to face. Not in the Crusade, not in the Heresy, and certainly not 10,000 years later. Even so, these forces were augmented with endless legions of madmen, fanatic hordes, and the legions of Vashtorr, his own demons. And the Dark Angels were in dire need of any form of break, any form of respite, for nothing could stop the Arkifane and his entourage. Even when the Dark Angels assembled dreadnoughts and veterans in the Galerium Exactor, there was doubt. Doubt if they could hold back the tide. Behind them, not far within their vaults, the object was practically singing out its location to Vashtorr, and so he would not be gainsaid, and he threw everything he had at them. The Dark Angels fought with cold resolve. Even their armor went haywire, their bandoliers of grenades going off under them, their weapons freezing, for Vashtorr was controlling the technology that he considered his tool. He would drain all energy from power armor, would have some shoot their own allies, but this took a toll on him. Concentration. It all required more and more of his concentration. Vashtorr was a mighty being in the warp, but could only force so much of his essence, his sentience, and his power into the corporeal form he had constructed. And he would not let go of his management of the overall confrontation. Hence, he was held at bay by Azrael himself. But he was stopped. And as the duel went on, Azrael began to know the truth. He had not healed from his surgery, for he had just crossed the Rubicon Primaris, had become a bigger, stronger, and more resilient Marine. Yet he was not even healed from this process. And thus Vashtorr held him back, despite him wielding the Sword of Silence, and with each swing of their weapons Azrael was weakening. All seemed lost as their Grand Master was beaten back, and the forces of evil now seemed so inexhaustible that they could simply not be stopped. They would take the Nameless Gate, they would go within, and they would be in the very heart of the rock. And that is when everything changed. For new forces now erupted from the shadows of the rock. The light failed across the entire structure, and then they appeared. Not just attacking the Dark Angels, but with shot and sword, claw and spell, they assailed the forces of Vashtorr as well. The two-sided battle had become three-way, and the Iron Warriors and Black Legion were taking the majority of the fire from the other two sides, if truth be told. And this is when the last player made his entrance. Vashtorr strode towards the nameless gate. He would smash a path through the remaining Dark Angels if he had to. Before he could reach them, however, the shadows writhed and thickened around him. The Arkifane felt hostile power envelop him. He sensed contempt and infinite duplicity rushing like currents through the penumbral energies and tasted bitter poison. Mocking laughter flitted around him as the Galarium extractor vanished behind a massive shadow. Vashtorr uttered a string of machine code oaths as he sought to break free from the malefic conjuration. He loosed a storm of infernal motive force that blasted shadows to tatters. He slammed his hammer against the flagstones beneath his feet and summoned buried cables and wires that burst up through them to strike like serpents at the coiling darkness. The mocking laughter turned to an affronted growl, low, wet and rumbling, as that of some colossal hunting cat denied its prey. The shadows writhed inward with redoubled force, twining about one another like coiling ropes that lashed around Vashtorr's limbs, his body, and even looped about his neck like a hempen noose. Slashing wires and blasts of energy severed one rope after another and sent their frayed ends tattered away as ashes. Vashtorr's eyes blazed, and the industrial glare momentarily drove back the darkness that crowded in on him. Yet more and more ropes slithered from the gloom. Belatedly, Vashtorr drew back those parts of his mind that had continued to obsessively observe the strategic situation through Vox and Auspex networks. He cursed himself for his compulsion to maintain a grip upon the wider strategic situation at such a time, realizing it robbed him of the immediacy and focus he needed to stave off this onslaught. He suspected he knew the name of his unseen assailant, and thought they may be bending all of their considerable power to this attack. As shadows entombed him and dragged him into their awaiting abyss, the Arkifane reflected bitterly that this was not the first time his compulsion to see and understand all had been his undoing. Vashtorr expected banishment, yet instead, the light and solidity of real space bloomed about him. The ground was hard under his hooves, the light stark as it spilled from the countless stars speckling the dark void above. He had not been attacked, he realized, but rather summoned to the surface of the rock. "The vainglorious fool wishes to gloat," he exclaimed. Vashtorr took in the tower of angels looming ahead of him, and the firestorms and wrecks that marked the ongoing battles between his dug-in followers and the Dark Angels' armored formations. He saw the vast shape of the Aurak Unleashed hanging high overhead. Vashtorr did not need his warp sight to know that the Ark of Omen had been sorely mauled in its ongoing duel with the rock. Yet the vessel fought on, with the cold cunning of the abominable intelligence that inhabited it, inflicting yet more damage on the battered rock. The Arkifane's warp sensors warned him of fresh shadow portals opening across the surface of the rock. He growled at the sight of more robed word-bearers and Alpha Legionaries emerging, supported by demon engines and battle tanks. Even more disturbing was the sight of Chaos Knights, clad in the penumbral livery of Be'lakor's worshippers, striding from within portals to join the attack. Some turned their guns on old Alderuk, or the Dark Angel's tanks. Others assaulted Vashtorr's own beleaguered forces. "Not to gloat, but to humble one who needs reminding of their lowly place in the Pantheon," came a rumbling voice from behind Vashtorr. He turned to see shadows coalescing into a towering figure whose vast wings blotted out the starfield. Be'lakor, the Dark Master, manifested from abysmal darkness, and even Vashtorr could not help but admire the sheer infernal majesty of this first amongst demon princes. "Well would it have been, once mortal, for you to leave my labours here unimpeded," said Vashtorr. "You are the lick-spittle of the despoiler," growled Be'lakor. "Appropriate, perhaps. that the oil-grubbed king of soot and scraps should serve as a mere tool in a mortal's hand. Yet you are not without your greater uses. I commend your labours in sabotaging the shield that warded this sad remnant of a place. No benefit to one such as you was my intent. Assured be, spat Vashtorr. Even as he spoke, he sent scrap code imperatives squaring out through the battle station, summoning all those of his followers that he could to his aid. And after I worked so hard in so many ways to ensure this meeting took place, said Bellicor, wounding. A spiteful thing you are, with little purpose and less wit, said Vashtorr. My purpose here is to remind you which demon deity holds power over the mortals, which of us dangles the despoiler on a thread, and then to send you back to lurk amongst your cogs, said Bellicor. With that, he launched himself to the attack. The battle between the two demons was complex for all who viewed it. The Arkifane was a master of technologies, but he was much outmaneuvered by the Dark Prince, and it was a close-run thing indeed. Yet Bellicor just taunted the Arkifane. He stated he had only come to disrupt his plans, and when he had achieved this, while keeping Vashtorr busy, Task Force 12 was approaching. The Arkifane's forces had been summoned to his side on the surface, but they were no longer enough to take the rock from the Dark Angels, and certainly not able to contend with the forces now arriving from the task force, for they had brought knights of House Raven, who were now tearing apart those loyal to the Arkifane, and Tigurius was amongst their number, leading from the front. With no other choice, Vashtorr could do nothing but order a general retreat. Of course, he did not wait. He himself just took to flight and returned to the Aurak Unleashed, but he knew that he should at least save as many of his lone troops as he could. Not to save face, but to bring at least some back to their masters. The Aurak Unleashed that mighty space hulk, then ran for the edge of space and disappeared into the warp. The Dark Angels had been saved, aye, but they had saved themselves also. And any traitor marine captured were not slain. Oh no. They were taken down into the chambers of the interrogators. But of course, the Dark Angels were still sons of the Lion. They gruffly sent all allies from their capital, informing them that they needed to re-raise the shields, the Gorgon's Aegis, and any inside would be trapped. But none mistook this for the feigned reason. It was very simple. This was the Rock, and they were not the sons of the Lion. So they were told to depart immediately, ever the sons as diplomatic as their sire. Yet the Imperials who had saved them also respected them, and they left without complaint or protestation. Durga hung in total darkness. Even his unnaturally sharp eyesight was confounded by so complete an absence of light. He had surmised his cell had been diligently designed to blind even Space Marine senses. The chains by which he was bound cruciform to the rough wet stone of the wall had also proven more than a match for post-human strength. Such details had raised questions for Durga during the early days of his captivity. Yet as the days crawled past, the sensory deprivation clashed with sensory overload, and the damp of the cell crept into his flesh. His curiosity had dulled. As the unremitting drag of his own heavily muscled body worked slow torture upon his arms and back, Durga had ceased to care about the Dark Angel's secrets. Starvation took far longer for one of the heretic Astartes than it did for a mortal, yet in the end even he was not immune to its ravages. Nor could he endure indefinitely the slow festering of his wounds or the turgid curdling of a mind trapped in a void dark box. Then there were the visits of his interrogator, kept carefully irregular, commencing most times with a shocking barrage of blinding light and deafening white noise projected from concealed vox ponders. Durga came to both dread and long for the awful stimuli of each fresh interrogation. Each time allowed him to prove to his captors that his hatred for them still burned strong. Yet each time also brought him incrementally closer to wishing he knew the right answers to satisfy their curiosity once and for all. Any end would be preferable to this interminable purgatory. The Durga's sluggish thoughts shattered like glass as the lumens blasted him with their glare, and a roar of static caused his ravaged body to fill with adrenaline. He thrashed weakly. He thought he snarled, but it was hard to tell amidst the din. The sound cut out as suddenly as it had begun, but the lights continued to flood his skull, even through closed eyelids. "How did you know where the rock would be?" Durga didn't know his interrogator had entered the chamber. The Dark Angel was simply there, a hulking silhouette against the glare. "The demon knew!" he snarled. The questions were familiar to him, learned by rote, so that he could have answered them in advance, had he known the order in which they would come. "How was the Gorgon's Aegis disabled?" "The demon! The demon made a weapon, I have told you." Pain tore through him like wildfire. Durga had long given up attempting to determine where it came from, or how it was administered. He knew only that it felt each time as though his insides were being scoured with jagged glass and acid. "Why did you attack us?" "To burn your accursed chapter and all its—" Pain roared through him again. "Why did you attack us?" "Because you are corpse-worshipping vermin who—" Again. Agony. "Why did you attack us?" "Fine, you cur-son," spat Durga, blood and spittle running from his lips. "As I have told you, we came for the device, the one the demon coveted." "What is the device?" "I don't know." The pain lasted longer this time, racking Durga until he writhed and howled, then hung gasping in its wake. "What is the device?" "I do not know," he wheezed, loathing how broken he sounded. "What is the nature of the demon?" "They call it the Archifane, Vashtorr. It has allied itself to the War Master. It is a thing of engines and of cogs. I know no more. But I loathe the damn thing. The despoiler would never have abandoned me in this nest of vermin." Durga braced for pain, but none was forthcoming. Its absence had become as jarring as its onset. "Where is the demon now?" asked the interrogator. Durga opened his mouth to explain, wearily, and for the 100th time, that he did not know. He froze in surprise. The information was there, poised behind his lips, as though eager to be voiced. The Somnian Stars. The demon has fled back to the Somnian Stars." Pain exploded through him. "Is this a trick?" asked the interrogator. No, gasped Durga. "It is in the Somnian Stars." "That is no small region," said the interrogator. "Give me specifics." Durga found that he could, and felt no inclination to keep the answers to himself. He told all that he knew. He hoped it might be enough to bring an end to his suffering, even though part of him knew it would not. Minutes later, Interrogator Chaplain Zacharias sealed the door to the heretic's cell and left him in the darkness again. Stashing the heavy iron key within his robes, he turned to Asmodai, who waited in the corridor. "The heretic said the same as the others," he reported. Asmodai nodded gravely, expression hidden by his ornate faceplate. "Where has this sudden knowledge come from? And where the sudden eagerness to impart it?" he mused. "It must be reported to the Supreme Grand Master," said Zacharias. "And yet it must be wondered at also, for does this not have the ring of the supernatural about it?" said Asmodai. "If it is the lure for a trap, It is a strange and unsubtle one." "Nevertheless," said Zacharias. "Nevertheless," echoed Asmodai in agreement, "I will bear this revelation to Lord Azrael, that he might decide what is to be done with it." Dread times are these. Not since the revelation of Luther's betrayal has our brotherhood faced so much peril. The rock itself has been violated by the Neverborn, infiltrated by the Empyrean spawn. Luther escaped, something prevented by my predecessors for 10,000 years. Showed a weakness in me that is a dark stain upon my soul, which will remain with me for all my remaining days. Even should I somehow recover him, and return him to the depths of the rock once more, truly, I am not merely unforgiven, but unforgivable. Azrael, Chapter Master of the Dark Angels. Abaddon the Despoiler swung Draconian and lopped the head from another blade-armed cyborg. The creature toppled amidst a spray of oily blood and motive force. Abaddon stepped on it as he pressed ahead, crushing the cog design emblazoned there into the collapsing chest cavity. More soldiers of the Adeptus Mechanicus lunged at him with their transonic blades thrumming, and he slew each one in turn. The Despoiler was in a foul mood, and not to be delayed by such half-human impediment as these. Bursting through a gold-chased arch, Abaddon found himself overlooking a vast cogitator pit, wreathed in sacred incense. Hunched tech adepts peered up at him from their stations. Elite Skitarii clattered along gantries, firing their rifles at him as they came. Abaddon raised the talon of Horus and let fly, even as his black legionary spilled through the arch at his back and joined the fray. "Leave none alive!" roared Abaddon. "Heap their carcasses in the pit!" The servants of the Omnissiah fought with all the zeal of fanatics defending a site sacred to their god. Yet all their cyborg might and hardwired faith could not match the ancient cunning and fury of the War Master and his veteran killers. So it was that, mere moments after he had led his spear tip into the heart of the Tech Priest Shrine, Abaddon stood upon a gantry, overlooking a pit filled to the brim with the flesh, blood, and sparking machinery of its defenders. He glanced at those of his own warriors who had fallen, and curled his lip. "This has cost me, demon," he muttered. "It had best be worth the time and lives." Abaddon gestured to the cabal of sorcerers who waited at the rim of the pit. They began chanting, swaying, and scattering ichor from spiked censers as they worked their infernal seance. The air crackled with dark power, thickening until it felt as though a malefic thunderstorm were about to erupt at the chamber's heart. Within the pit, the charnel heap of ruined machinery and butchered flesh heaved. Worms of copper and silver writhed around the vast mass, leaving brass threads behind themselves as they chewed and squirmed. Even Abaddon was not above a grimace of disgust at the sound made by the profusion of flesh and metal as it surged upwards. Sparks drizzled from the churning mass, gore splattered the gantry, and the reek of cooking flesh rolled over Abaddon, as a rudimentary face formed amidst the foulness. One eye formed from a huge lumen dome, the other from hundreds of clustered ocular augmetics. Its open maw was fanged with jagged spars of broken cogitator and transonic blade. "Abaddon the Despoiler," said Vashtorr, his voice a blood-wet rumble. "Come you before me to account for the actions of the once mortal? Am I to believe you have muzzled the lurking mongrel for its misdeeds?" Abaddon scowled. He had long known that permitting Bellicor within his inner circle of lieutenants was a gamble. Better to have such a duplicitous being close than leave him free to run amok. He had his own plans for Bellicor's punishment, but he resented Vashtorr's accusatory tone. "There will be an accounting for Bellicor, Arkifane. It shall be a time of my choosing, and in a manner I orchestrate. I am not your servant. You are a part of my plans, not the master of them. I would be more cautious in my tone of address, had I failed as you have to deliver upon your promises. Not one of your lackeys am I, to be commanded thus," growled Vashtorr. "One of my champions would not have failed so spectacularly to seize the prize from aboard the rock," said Abaddon. "And yet one of them it was who engineered this setback," replied the grotesque demonic avatar. Corpse meat and shattered circuitry spilled from its malformed lips as it spoke. "Was it not you in command of the attack? Was it not you who failed to plan for such contingencies?" asked Abaddon. "I begin to question the vaunted talents of the Arkifane. A poor workman blames his tools, demon. How is it that your rivals have not overthrown your hold upon the soul forges?" To Abaddon's surprise, this barb was not met with anger, but with a volley of vox-static booms that he realized approximated laughter. "You seek to goad me, as though I were a simplistic mortal construct of primitive urges and flesh-bound mind meat. The embodiment of malefic artifice am I. Complexity, creation, experiment, and progression unbound. Blame is but an error to be actioned, time an operational constraint that only one of us here must obey. Sanity is a limitation of mortals that places the detail of my labors wholly beyond the capacity of your mental architecture. Negligible is the advantage you gain in these futile attempts. Unfavorable the expenditure of oxygen and energy. I would alter tack were I you, War Master." Abaddon suspected privately that the demon was more fallible than it protested. He had fought in many sieges, however, and he knew a hopeless escalade when he saw one. He decided to take the Arkifane's advice and allow himself a base chuckle. "Very well, mighty and all-knowing Vashtorr. How do we improve upon our design after this setback?" "All matters of true import are questions, to which many answers connect." "Speak plainly, demon," replied Abaddon, unable to keep the ill temper from his voice. The sounds of distant battle were growing closer from elsewhere in the shrine complex, and as yet his expenditures had brought him no information of value. He suspected the Arkifane knew as much, and was enjoying testing his patience. "Completion of the key remains our single purpose, that you might have your weapon, and I my final apotheosis. We still require as many more key fragments as can be secured, and we still lack one of the triumvirate of core mechanisms. Our arcs have now accumulated more than 70% of the desired fragments, amongst them a pleasing high ratio of ritual significance, and thus supernaturally empowered artifacts. Know you that my labors toil without rest. Although the key nears completion in its place of restoration, those of our ark still huntings search for fragments of great power that will ensure the key is as great and terrible a device as can be engineered. As it should be, so all this is." But without, Abaddon caught himself. It would not do to name their missing prize in this loyalist sanctum. He did not know who or what might be listening. "Without the last of the three, all is wasted effort. The key will not wake. Some cogs turn more slowly than others, War Master. Some alignments recur." If you have a point to make it. I am drawn back into battle, spat Abaddon, his patience at an end. Exploded the required knowledge of the place of restoration. I have into the minds of those who fell as captives, into the hands of the Lion-based progeny. Even now, the biomechanisms of their minds release this secret. They are compelled to speak. Abaddon thought quickly, mind racing, weighing the import of the demon's deed. Audacious. Lead the foe to the key. Have them deliver our final prize in person. Poetic for an engineer. But what makes you think they will walk into such an obvious trap? Anemic excuses for space marines they might be, but they are not such fools. I have many cogs, mortal. Myriad are my mechanisms. Yet truly, it is but a matter of logical cogitation. So audacious, yet so seemingly clumsy a step as this. Is it a trap, it appears, a double bluff? Seek we to bring them to the Somnian stars, or to ward them away? They think not of grand plans, seeing already the complexity and engineering expended in my attack upon their stone sanctuary, and presuming a sum total that has ended in defeat. Now their thoughts are of vengeance. Now they see a foe fled, one that perhaps knows things he should not. They will not risk my freedom, nor restrain their need to punish my effrontery. Perhaps, scowled Abaddon. Something exploded outside the shrine. He glanced over his shoulder to see black smoke boiling through the arch. His warriors slipped out into the fire-lit gloom, and the bark of their bolt guns rang out. Abaddon turned back to the demonic avatar. Even if you are right, why would they bring a rock? Why not simply send warships? All the better if they do, said Vashtorr. I have still the Aurak Myriad. Its talent for locating the rock remains undimmed. If they seek to conceal their stone haven, I shall fall upon it while they rise in the jaws of the trap. You would have no way of bringing down their shields a second time, said Abaddon. This at last drew a flare of anger from the demon. The myriad eye lenses blazed with sudden and intense furnace light. I am the warp god of the forges. No device fashioned by mortal hand can I not undo. But it will not come to that. They will guess, too, that I might return. They will clutch their secrets close, keep them in sight, and surround them with strength. It is their way. Only be ready, despoiler. In your linear terms, the end hastens closer. Another explosion bellowed nearby. The shrine shook, and chunks of the ghastly, flesh-metal avatar tore away as the sorcerer's concentration wavered. Abaddon wished to interrogate the demon further, remained unconvinced by its claims, but he was out of time. Do your part, demon, and I will do mine. Do not fail me again. The only answer he received was another vox blurt of dark mirth, which distorted into a howl of feedback as the avatar of Vashtorr disintegrated back into the pit in a gory avalanche. Abaddon turned towards the sounds of battle with his thoughts whirling. Would Vashtorr uphold his end of their bargain? Could the key truly be fashioned and used as his unholy ally claimed? Would the final onslaught of the Arks into Ultramar, the Damocles Gulf, Ultima Macaria, and the Medusa Reach yield the rewards of supernatural power they promised? As had so often been the case in his long war, Abaddon had to trust in his agents, his followers, and his inconstant allies. With a snarl, the despoiler strode toward the battle. He was all too ready to vent his frustrations upon the hated imperial foes. And so we inch closer to the waking of the lion, the Primarch of the First Legion. We have seen the model, and what a model it is! We know he is coming. So, only 2 books now remain in this campaign. Farsight, and then the reveal one would imagine, as it is called simply, The Lion. And I cannot explain how excited I am for this new lore, and I hope you will join me here when it finally drops. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Now, subscribe and like and all that good stuff if you enjoyed the video. And join me every Friday as I take dives into the Warhammer universe. Or check out our other channels on natural history and mythology, links in the description. Patreon, merch, notification button, you know the boogaloo. And until then, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.